All right, chapter 18 of The Clue in the Crumbling Wall. Poet's Nook is the title. So excited that her hands trembled, Nancy lifted the lid of the rusty metal box. Were the Heath pearl and other jewels inside? But the girls were to be disappointed at the contents, for the box appeared to contain only papers and photographs. "Oh, why would anyone bother to hide such things?" Bess exclaimed, completely let down. "There's nothing valuable here. And after all our trouble, too." "Well, we mustn't be too hasty," cautioned Nancy. "We haven't looked through the things yet." Carefully, she lifted out the top photograph. The picture was an old one, yellowed with age, and contained traces of mold. It showed a half pose of a middle-aged man with side whiskers. At the bottom was scrawled the name Ira Heath and a date. Nancy was about to hand the picture to George when a detail of the old estate owner's clothing caught her attention. A watch chain, which hung from Mr. Heath's vest pocket, had an unusual charm attached to it. "Girls, notice the watch charm?" she cried. "I saw the very same thing at Sam Weatherby's curio shop." "How did it get there?" Bess asked, studying the photograph. "Do you suppose he sold it to Mr. Weatherby before his death?" "Nothing of the sort. Hector Keep sold it to him along with some other jewelry." "Hector Keep?" George exclaimed in surprise. "Then you think—" "I don't know what to think, George," Nancy admitted. There's always the possibility that the charm was given to Mr. Keep, but in that case, there wouldn't have been any reason for him pretending it was an heirloom of his own family. That's what he told Mr. Weatherby." "It certainly sounds suspicious," George said, reaching for another photograph. "Oh, here's an old-fashioned one." She held up the picture of a sweet-faced woman in a long velvet gown with a bustle. An inscription identified her as Ira Heath's wife, Ida. The woman's dark hair was worn high, exposing shapely ears, which were set off with earrings of unique design. "Those earrings!" Nancy exclaimed when she saw them. "They're at Mr. Weatherby's shop, too!" "Oh, now I am suspicious!" There were other pictures in the box, but the girls passed over them quickly, as they were of no particular interest. An article that did hold their attention was a small leather-bound diary. The fly-leaf bore Walter Heath's name, and the dates of many of the notations showed they had been made not many months before his death. "This may be what's really valuable in this box," Nancy declared jubilantly. Rapidly, she skimmed through the small book. Many of the pages were blank, but under one date, she came to an item important enough to read aloud. "Stumbled upon something which may prove to be a treasure. Whelks are right on the shores of Heath Castle. They contain a beautiful magenta dye. Am mixing it with various chemicals. So far I have produced 6 shades of fast-color dye." "This proves your theory about Walter Heath's experiments was right, Nancy," George said in praise. "I wonder what became of the dye," the Drew girl mused, thumbing through the little book. "Me Hardy said that in the old days magenta dye brought high prices. Dyed wool sold for more than $200 a pound." "Read on," urged Bess impatiently. "Maybe we'll learn what became of the dye." Unmindful of the men whom the girls had heard on the other side of the cloister, Nancy searched for another important notation. "Here's something," she cried a moment later. "Listen to this. I don't trust the new chauffeur Biggs. Have decided to hide all the bottles of magenta dye until my experiments are complete." "Does it say where he hid them?" George demanded. "Read the next page." "There doesn't seem to be anything more. That was the last paragraph in the book." "Oh, what a shame," Bess wailed. "I skimmed over the first part. Maybe I'll find other clues when I read the entire diary carefully, but there's no time now." "I'll say there isn't," agreed George. "Shh! We'd better duck out of here and fast." From just across the stone barrier came the barking of a dog. Voices were audible, and each moment they grew louder. The 2 workmen were approaching. "How about looking on the opposite side of this wall?" they heard one of the men ask his companion. "Okay," agreed the other. "May as well make a good job of it while we're here." Fearful lest they be seen, the girls sped on tiptoe along the cloistered walk, Nancy carrying the metal box. We should have gone the other way. Toward the beach, she whispered belatedly. We may trap ourselves this way. Her prediction proved to be only too correct. 100 yards farther on, the cloister abruptly ended at one of the castle walls. The door leading into the big dwelling was locked. "Oh, what'll we do?" Bess asked uneasily. "This is awful." The men had climbed the wall and now were moving slowly up the flagstone passageway. In a moment or two, they certainly would see the girls. "Nancy, we'll have to hide the box," George said, listening to the approaching footsteps. "A better idea would be to hide ourselves," Bess whispered, "but where?" Not far from the castle wall was a nook of considerable size. In their haste, the girls had passed it with little more than a fleeting glance. Now, in looking about for a place of concealment, Nancy saw that it offered possibilities. "Follow me," she directed her companions. Above the arched entrance to the refuge had been chiseled the words, "Poet's Nook." But the girls scarcely noticed this as they slipped into the hiding place barely an instant before the two workmen came into view. "I must hide this box so the men can't take it, even if they catch us," Nancy whispered grimly. Frantically, the girls looked about them for a place to hide the precious metal box. There seemed to be none. Then Nancy noticed a loose stone in the wall directly above a bench at the back of the niche. Almost without hope, she asked George to see if it would move. The stone came out, revealing an empty space behind it. Fortunately, the recess was large enough to hold the metal box. Nancy slipped it inside, and George quickly fitted the stone back into place. By this time, the men were very near and had stopped walking. Nancy wanted to peer from the nook, but recognized the folly of trying to see the men. With her chum, she flattened herself against the wall beyond the opening and waited. "How about working in that poet's nook?" one of the men asked suddenly. "Maybe we'll find something there." Nancy, Bess, and George waited with bated breaths for the answer. "We looked there once. That hiding place over the bench was empty." "Sure, but if we take out the whole wall, we might find another hiding place. You're lazy if you ask me, Cobb." "Did I ask you?" the other growled. "Swinging a pick is hard work. We're not getting too much money for it either." The other laughed. "What we found already is good enough to pay for me. And if we find the other thing, we can live on Easy Street." Nancy and her chums relaxed slightly, thinking that the men would not search the poet's nook a second time, but their hopes were dashed. "How about it?" the first man demanded. "Do we take out the wall or don't we?" "Okay," the one addressed as Cobb replied. "You go ahead. I'll be with you in a minute." That's the end of the chapter.